Hey gang, it's been about a week since my last video on Assassin's Creed Shadows and their strange angle of DEI that placed Yasuke as the main protagonist for their new game. I thought there wouldn't be much to talk about after I went over some of the broad strokes of history, similar games and movies, and their abhorrent pricing model. But in the few days after that, we would see more info come out on their poor world design, focus on the character She, and the fact that they are making Yasuke Yasuge. And with those forces combined, I have deemed it worthy to make another talk on this feudal era tire fire. When the trailer dropped, we had a scene where Yasuke was brought into the presence of someone that we can assume is Oda Nobunaga. In it, we were shown this strange tatami setup at the time, and I used to watch some Japanese period dramas, and I still watch a bunch of anime, and I had never seen that kind of a setup, but I'm not an expert on the subject, and I didn't have anything to reference it against, so I didn't think it worth mentioning. However, Japanese Twitter didn't drop the subject, and we got to see a few interesting viewpoints from this on why it looks so strange. We saw a post from the user Dea is Goddess that points out that Nobunaga has an aide sitting on his level, which is a bit of a no-no, as well as the square tatami. And another user would find out that this style of tatami is used at banquet halls at hotels in Japan. And this speaks volumes to the state of their design team, which used to be one of the best in the industry. Just to explain how far they've fallen, back in 2019, there was a fire at the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. It was a cultural and historic disaster for France. The French wanted to rebuild it just the way that it was before the fire. And one of the key reasons they were able to do so was that the Assassin's Creed team had made a laser scan of the cathedral to make sure that it was a perfect replica for their game. So the Assassin's Creed team, in their bid for accuracy, was a key contributor in offering these scans and 500,000 euros to assist in the rebuilding of the cathedral. So the same team that would have this level of accuracy in some of their older games is now using banquet halls at hotels for their reference material. I had a lot of complaints about their F-tier writing team before, but I am genuinely disappointed to see another team inside the Assassin's Creed franchise do such a terrible job and they're paying attention to details. Architecture aside, we would see a user from Japanese TikTok go off on how everyone was an idiot because when referring to Yasuke, we would see this symbol, She, in front of his name. And that symbol denoted one of the 4 social classes in Japan. She denoted samurai. Open and shut case, right? Except this user got annihilated when they were cross-examined, where a user broke down the Shinokosho system, which in short was, at the time, Japan was broken up into 4 social castes. You had your samurai, farmer, craftsman, and merchants. However, the top of this chart is a bit of a misnomer for the Warring States period. Now, the top definition that you see for the character She is samurai, but another scholar. There were plenty of people in this She social stratum that were regular officials and bureaucrats that weren't relied upon for combat roles like you would see samurai. So let's take a look at this from a pragmatic point of view. If you have 100 people, let's say 50 of them are fighters and 50 of them are just good for paperwork, tax collection and the like. A tax collector wouldn't fall under any of the other social strata. They're not a farmer, they're not an artisan, they're not a merchant. But if you're a ruler, you do not want a social system where a couple of losses in combat are going to mean that your government is unable to collect taxes. That kind of system would lead to catastrophe. Also, women couldn't be warriors, but they were still part of the samurai caste. Now, there were a few female warriors. You can look at Onimusha over on Wikipedia to go over some broad strokes on a few examples and art pieces depicting them, but they were not common. So while you're going to see many in this top social strata of She be samurai and the samurai caste, that's not going to be all of them. Yasuke was granted the title of Kosho, which is basically the equivalent to a page, which is a servant of a bushi or a fighter. A great example of this is the Fallout series, where you have the Brotherhood of Steel, and they have pages that carry their stuff. This does not make that individual a knight or a samurai, but it does give them a role, and eventually they could be promoted if their service is good enough. Part of this that pisses me off is that instead of just leaving this to social media to argue with each other of what the truth is going to be, you've got these individuals that are going over to Wikipedia that are trying to edit articles so that they can rewrite history to support this view that Yasuke was a samurai. And the source for their claim is basically, trust me, bro. And if trust me, bro was a credible source, it would have made my time in high school and college so much easier. If you want to put people on blast on social media because you disagree with their take, fine. That's what social media is for. That person can block you if they don't like it. That is the way it's supposed to be. But if you're trying to run defense for a multi-billion-dollar company by changing Wikipedia to defend their shitty research, then you're a special kind of stupid. And a bit about Yasuke that I want to point out, where people point out that the fact that he carried swords would prove that he is a samurai. And I would point out that in the Warring States period, every daimyo or lord needed fighters. They needed a shit ton of fighters. And farmers doubled as warriors if their liege lord needed men in the form of Ashigaru. It was not uncommon at the time for farmers to have a sword or a spear or a bow so that they could defend their homes, or they could take those weapons to go fight as an Ashigaru for their lord. Oda Nobunaga was legendary for introducing firearms into his army. And those firearms were not carried by samurai. They would take peasants, where it was just, hey, aim here, pull trigger, bullet goes downfield. That made all the sense in the world for a lowly peasant to do. You wanted your professional warriors that were trained in the spear or the sword to use the weapons that they were used to. And training people on guns is relatively super basic and easy to do. One of the biggest reasons in history why we saw so many armies pivot to using guns, even when bows were a better choice, was because it was so much easier to train individuals to use a gun than saying, oh, well, you need people to train every week on this bow so that they're good to go potentially for a fight in 10 years. Whereas with a rifle, you could give them a couple weeks training, show them how to pack a shot, and then fire that. And that's all the training that they needed. It was revolutionary in terms of training for an army. Now, in 1588, Toyotomi Hideyoshi would be imperial regent, and he would issue an order for a sword hunt, or katanagari. And this was meant to remove those weapons from the peasants. So samurai would go village to village, they'd find all these peasants, and they would turn in their weapons, because Hideyoshi wanted to reinforce this idea that not just any regular person could carry a weapon of any kind. Now, this happens almost a decade after Yasuke arrives in Japan, and about 5 years after he's expelled. So he's there at a period of time where it's not uncommon for just regular dudes to have a sword. That would be considered acceptable. It doesn't make you a samurai. You are just a fighter. And that's fine. That is the norm for the period. But with all that pesky history out of the way, we would see some truly bonkers statements out of Ubisoft. One of the Assassin's Creed Shadows production managers would tweet this: "Yas is such a badass. Can't wait for you to see his soft romantic side, though." Which would lead folks to go back and reread an article that Ubisoft themselves had released when they announced Assassin's Creed Shadows. And in it, they would confirm that they would attract and be attracted to different types of people. Now, initially, I thought it was kind of weird that the female character in the story, Naoe, was called a shinobi, which usually refers to a male ninja instead of a kunoichi, which is female ninja. But if they're transforming Yasuke into Yasuke, then it totally makes sense why that would make that decision. Now, while some would look at this and say that this is totally stupid, I'm actually a huge fan of this. Worst case scenario is they make some weird romance stories that nobody cares about. But best case scenario, they write a story that's an absolute joke, and people online will get to mock Ubisoft relentlessly. And for those of you that are unaware or forgot, Ubisoft hired a very specialist to teach them the history and the norms of the Warring States period in Japan in the form of Sachi Schmidt-Hori. How special is she? Like, her only book is written on medieval Japanese pedophiles special. So I'm not really sure what this team is going to make, but it's probably going to be a special kind of awful. Now, I've spent a lot of time going over a lot of the minor points as it is compared to the most egregious issue for this game. The price. Everything we have talked about is a far second when we look at this atrocious pricing model. Now, I'm going to splice in all the gameplay footage we got of this game to this point. All right, you ready? Was that exciting? Did you enjoy the gameplay footage? Exactly. There was none. But they are still asking for you to pay $130 to get this game. Fuck that. I wholeheartedly want this game and their other game that's coming out soon with their Star Wars title to fail. Because if these games are a commercial success, that means that other game companies are going to see that this is a good way to make money, and they are going to mimic this same kind of shit. Just this week, we got a $50 game released with 5 hours of gameplay. If people keep shelling out a bunch of money for this kind of garbage, we're going to see games coming out for $60 with 4 hours of gameplay. We're going to see more $130 plus pre-orders. I hate it. The more that people support this kind of behavior from AAA companies, the more we are going to see it. No matter how you feel on a lot of the salacious details for this game, I think we can all come together and agree that this is really shitty behavior in their pricing model. Because the more people that think it's okay, the more we're going to see it across the board. But that's all I got to say on this matter. After the last video, I went on a Shogun Total War II binge to clear an Oda campaign. And this time, after this video, I'm gonna go back and play the best samurai-focused game that I own in Ghosts of Tsushima. So that should be pretty exciting. And if you made it this far, I super appreciate you coming by and watching the video. I'm pretty new to the space, so if you enjoyed it, if you could leave a like, comment, or a sub, that would be huge for helping me out. And thanks again, and I hope to see you again in a future video. Farewell.